I'm just expressing my sorrow at the Afghan people. That's what the media is trying to create, a narrative that Biden fucked up, when the truth is there was no way. This is the least bad option. You're looking at it. You're looking at the least bad option. There was no way for us to leave Afghanistan clean. It just couldn't happen. There was always going to be people hurt because we went in this way. Instead of accepting the Taliban surrender in 2001, instead of accepting the reality on the ground, instead of us not supporting the Mujahideen in the first place in order to draw blood against the Soviets, it was always going to be like this.
We begin with the race to evacuate thousands of Americans and allies in Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover of the country. Biden administration official told Senate staffers yesterday that as many as 15,000 Americans are still in Afghanistan. About 1,100 American citizens, permanent residents, and their families have been evacuated so far. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has the latest from Kabul.
We made it onto the military side of Kabul airport. This is where the U.S. is carrying out its final withdrawal from Afghanistan. The American flag still flies here. This side of the airport has long been an American and NATO base, and it's full, with extra troops brought in to protect the evacuation.
This has become effectively the last U.S. military base in Afghanistan, the last presence of American troops in this country after 20 years. And they're only focused on one thing, wrapping it up.
The evacuations are mainly bringing out Americans and other foreign nationals, along with Afghans who managed to get visas and who are happy to be leaving. Hundreds packed into one American cargo jet. The Biden administration has promised to expedite visas for Afghans who worked for the U.S. military, but tens of thousands are still waiting. I spoke to a group of Afghans. They've all worked on this base for over 5 years. Not one has a visa.
What did you do on this base? What was your job?
Yeah, I work in billeting office.
In the billeting office?
Billeting office.
Finding people, places to rooms. If you go back home, are you worried?
If you go outside, of course they will kill us.
You're here. You all have badges. You're on this base, and you can't get out. That seems like a total collapse of bureaucracy, or it seems like they just don't care.
Yeah, they don't care, I think.
So what is it like for all of you to watch these planes take off in front of you and know that you can't get on one?
I swear we're crying. What's so sad for us?
Do you feel betrayed?
Yeah.
Even worse than the lack of action, they say, is the lack of concern.
This is the first time that somebody asked about our lives. Nobody before come to ask what's your problem, what your problem, family have been dangerous or no, nobody.
20 years, man. Yeah, tomorrow we would have figured it out.
So this us
this
talking to you.
This is the first time.
Outside the airport, there's utter desperation. Afghans pushing and pleading to get in and board a flight away from Taliban rule. They don't believe the Taliban, which promised to be different, that women will have rights, a free press, and a general amnesty for translators who help the U.S. military. Men like
I think they're right not to trust that. They're absolutely right.
Tom, which is what U.S. troops called him. We've been following his story for months. He went on combat missions and helped American troops find and kill Taliban fighters. He's been waiting for his visa for 4 years and asked us to blur his face because today he's in hiding.
They are just saying they will kill us. They will kill us tomorrow, today. This is my children. So what's going to be their future?
Afghans we spoke to say they were wrong to trust American promises, as the U.S. is leaving Afghanistan in the hands of extremists and leaving so many allies behind.
Our thanks to Richard Engel for that report. National security agencies within the Biden administration are finger-pointing as officials seek to explain why America's longest war has ended in chaos. Multiple officials tell NBC News that top military leaders are furious with President Biden's national security team because they wanted to start evacuating vulnerable Afghans as early as May, but were not.
Okay, so what's happening here? Wow, this is if you fall for this, you're dumb. You're dumb as fuck if you fall for this shit. This is an attempt by the military brass to put the blame on Biden. That's what's happening here. 20 years of failure and theft, and they're trying to put it onto Biden. That's what it is. Absolute garbage. Also, Biden already explained this. The reason why they didn't evacuate Afghans is the Afghan government didn't want them to, wouldn't allow them to. So what's he supposed to do? Overrule the Afghan government? We'll get into that.
Allowed to do so. Many officials expressing annoyance at the State Department, saying leaders there have been extremely slow in processing the paperwork needed to deal with Afghan translators and others eligible for resettlement. But at the State Department, officials are pointing the finger at Congress, which created a tedious 14-step process for the special visa program that diplomats by law must complete before they can issue the visas. Congress ultimately passed legislation to streamline the program, but not until the end of July. Willie.
Need a flow chart.
So literally 2 weeks ago.
Follow all that finger pointing. Meanwhile, in recent weeks, CIA intelligence assessments began to warn in increasingly stark terms about the potential for a rapid and total collapse of the Afghan military and government.
Now we have CIA propaganda. Here's Operation Mockingbird happening all over again. Oh, it wasn't our fault. You know, it wasn't our fault that the people we funded in the 80s was behind 9/11 and they're still in Saudi Arabia walking around. But nah, it's not our fault.
According to the New York Times, just last month, intelligence reports were questioning whether any Afghan security forces would muster serious resistance to the Taliban and whether the government could hold on to Kabul. The Times. You can't listen to these. This is so blatant. Notes, intelligence agencies predicted.
What was Operation Mockingbird? Okay.
Seizing cities, a cascading collapse could happen rapidly, and the Afghan security.
Operation Mockingbird is a alleged large-scale program of the United States Central Intelligence Agency that began in the early years of the Cold War and attempted to manipulate news media for propaganda purposes. CIA support of front groups was exposed when a 1967 Rampart magazine article reported that the National Student Association received funding from the CIA. The 75, the Church Committee, revealed agency connections with journalists and civic groups. In a document referred to as a Family Jewels, which was published by the CIA, containing a reference to Project Mockingbird, which was the name of an operation in 1967 wiretapping two journalists believed to disseminate classified information. The New York Times in 1974 published an article by Seymour Hersh claiming the CIA had violated its charter by spying on anti-war activists. Former CIA officials and some lawmakers called for a congressional inquiry that became known as the Church Committee. The committee's report confirmed earlier stories that charged that the CIA had cultivated relationships with private institutions, including the press. The Church Committee stated it found 50 journalists who had official but secret relationships with the CIA. In a 1977 Rolling Stone article, The CIA and the Media, reporter Carl Bernstein expanded upon the Church Committee's report and said that around 400 press members were considered intelligence assets by the CIA, including New York Times publisher Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, columnist and political analyst Stuart Alsup, and Time magazine. Bernstein documented the way in which overseas branches of major U.S. news agencies had for many years served as the eyes and ears of Operation Mockingbird, which functioned to disseminate CIA propaganda throughout the domestic U.S. media. So, I mean, this is just the same old shit. All right, let's keep watching these absolute morons.
Now, the American people, Admiral, support this move, and yet I'm still surprised at our rapid removal. Ned Price at the State Department said this wasn't abandonment, this wasn't evacuation. It's exactly what it is. And I just wonder, Admiral, how the United States of America maintains security, not just for everybody else's interest, but for our own selfish self-interest. If we can't even keep 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 troops in a country like Afghanistan, in a country like Syria, we've now figured out over 20 years, and everybody's going to be talking about what have we learned over the past 20 years. Well, we figured out how to have a really small footprint in places like Syria and Afghanistan, and at the same time, stop the Russians, stop the Syrians, stop the Iranians, stop ISIS, stop the Turks, stop everybody from advancing. What do you think about a country? What do you think about politicians that aren't willing to actually put 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 troops in hot...
Okay, right off the bat. He's a dumb fuck. So in 2012, we put 120,000 Americans into Afghanistan and accomplished nothing. The reason why 3,000 troops was holding the line now is because we signed a peace deal. Trump signed a peace deal with Taliban last year, agreeing to withdraw by May of this year. And when Biden came in, the idea was either break the peace treaty signed by Trump and declare war on the Taliban and put tens of thousands of American troops back in to fight them for a stalemate, or follow through with Trump's peace treaty and end this stupid fucking war that hasn't had a point for at least 10 years. But remember, this is a propagandist who is trying to manipulate people's opinions into thinking that Joe Biden just didn't want to keep 3,000 American troops in. It was that easy. No, it wasn't that easy. It was either break the peace treaty, redeclare war on the Taliban, or not. He chose not.
Spots when most of those troops want to be there and are upset when they're withdrawn.
The way to think about this, Joe, is leverage. In other words, what can you gain with relatively small footprint, relatively low cost in a...
Wow, they just bring on a fucking warmonger right on. Hey, chat, I want you to guess. What is the Admiral doing these days? What's he doing right now? What's his job right now, do you think? I want you to take a guess. Admiral is a retired four-star U.S. naval officer. He's currently an operating executive of the Carlyle Group, a global investment firm, and chair of the board of counselors of McLarty Associates, an international consulting firm. Now, chat, what's the Carlyle Group?
Carlyle Group is a multinational conglomerate that invests in heavily government-regulated industries like telecommunications, healthcare, and particularly defense. Both George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush worked for the Carlyle Group, the same company that counted the bin Laden family among its investors. Carlyle Group was holding its annual investor conference on the morning of September 11th in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington, D.C. At that meeting were all of the Carlyle regulars. James Baker, likely John Major, definitely George H.W. Bush, though he left the morning of September 11th. Shafiq bin Laden, who is Osama bin Laden's half-brother, and was in town to look after his family's investments in the Carlyle Group. All of them together in one room watching as the planes hit the towers, and that in fact the bin Laden family was invested in one of their defense funds, which ironically meant that as the United States started increasing its defense spending, the bin Laden family stood to gain from those investments through the Carlyle Group.
Our Commander-in-Chief, President George W. Bush.
With all the weapons companies it owned, the Carlyle Group was, in essence, the 11th largest defense contractor in the United States.
Thanks a lot.
It owned United Defense, makers of the Bradley Armored Fighting Vehicle. September 11th guaranteed that United Defense was going to have a very good year. Just 6 weeks after 9/11, Carlyle filed to take United Defense public, and in December made a one-day profit of $237 million. But sadly, with so much attention focused on the bin Laden family being important Carlyle investors, the bin Ladens eventually had to withdraw. Bush's dad, though, stayed on as senior advisor to Carlyle's Asia board for another 2 years.
As unseemly as it seems to know that George H.W. Bush was meeting with the bin Laden family while Osama was a wanted terrorist well before September 11th. It's very discomforting for Americans to know that. George H.W. Bush is a man who has obviously incredible reach into the White House. He receives daily CIA briefings, which is the right of any ex-president, but very few ex-presidents actually exercise that right. He does. And I think in a very real way, they are benefiting from the confusion that arises when George H.W. Bush visits Saudi Arabia on behalf of Carlyle and meets with the royal family and meets with the bin Laden family. Is he representing the United States of America, or is he representing an investment firm in the United States of America, or is he representing both? This company is about money. It's not about conspiracies to run the world or, engineer political maneuvering and things like that. It's about making money, and it's about making a lot of money, and they've done very well.
I can get you on the record on this question. In the White House view, there's no ethical conflict in former President Bush and former Secretary of State Jim Baker using their contacts with world leaders to represent one of the most well-known military arms dealers, the Carlyle Group.
The president has full faith that his family will conform with all proper ethics laws, and will act properly in their conduct.
Oh. You know, that's weird. Did you know? Man, I must have missed. See, you got former Supreme NATO Allied Commander. You don't have operating executive of Carlyle Group allied with the bin Laden family. Anyway, let's go back to what this warmongering person who personally profits from warmongering.
Very strategic place. I mean, look at a map. Afghanistan is parked in the middle of Russia, China, Pakistan, India. It's sitting on top of $1 trillion in rare earths and lithium, which goes in every car battery ever made. There's a lot of reason to want to keep stability in Afghanistan. By the way, starting with the fact that when it's ungoverned, it becomes a launch pad for things like 9/11. Doing it with 150,000 troops, when I commanded that mission, it had 150,000 troops. That's not cost effective. But doing it with 3,500 to 5,000 troops makes a lot of sense to me. So I agree with your premise. We are failing in keeping the leverage here. At this point, there's...
So what happens when the Taliban continues to win battlefield victory after battlefield victory and advances more and more? What if, because 3,000 American troops, they're well equipped, but eventually the aircraft have to go back to refuel and rearm. The bullets run out. You're going to be defeated on the battlefield by 100,000 Taliban, 500,000 Taliban. That's just the way it is. You have, like, this is just bullshit. Every single one of them. This is what you, so when you're wondering why is Biden's approval rating going down on this? Because this is the propaganda. This isn't Fox. This is MSNBC. MSNBC. Totally captured, totally corrupt, completely. And nobody says this shit but me. There's only one other place that I've seen good coverage of this. Hassan Stream. Everyone, and people come to me like, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is the thing that blows my fucking mind. Just stay in Afghanistan, chat. Just stay in. Just stay in. If we just stayed in. I mean, Rob's good on this too. Rob's good on this. There's a couple good people out there, you know. God. How do you guys do it? Don't worry, Mike. In 10 or 20 years, you'll be vindicated, just like Barbara Lee. Is she vindicated? People are disapproving of Biden pulling out now because the mainstream media is going after them. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It's what people hear. Don't you understand that?
Previous presidents have wanted to leave Afghanistan as well, but in the end they didn't, because we knew we had the lid on. We knew we had held al-Qaeda down, and that's the most we could have hoped for in Afghanistan. Nobody thought we were going to create a Jeffersonian Western-style democracy there.
Yeah.
Previous presidents.
So right there, the idea that we were there to help Afghan women and children, McConnell tells you that's a lie and it's propaganda. That other admiral was at least mask off. He said it's strategic. It's look at all these countries, its borders that we can intimidate. Look at the $1 trillion in resources we can steal. Nobody who actually believes the bullshit about helping Afghan women and children. We didn't care about them. It was never about that. That's why our puppet collapsed in 5 minutes. If you believe it, you're stupid. Seriously. The fervor around leaving is entirely propped up by the media. Once the media withdraws its attacks, public opinion will be snapped back to reality. Well, that would be what I would call wishful thinking, folks. Wishful thinkings. Because it's hard to go up in approval. It's easy to go down. All right, let's keep going.
White House.
Did we watch this already? Did we watch this already? No, okay, we didn't watch this one.
The White House this afternoon attempting to
I'm sorry, I'm mauling over this shit.
U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan as the Taliban solidifies its grip on that country, and Americans and allies rush to try to safely evacuate. This afternoon, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the Taliban has agreed to give civilians safe passage to the Kabul airport, where the U.S. within the next 24 hours. This striking image obtained by Defense One shows nearly 650 Afghans.
No, I obviously crad babies. I know you're serious. I'm talking to the audience, not to you. That's the point of my sarcasm. It literally doesn't matter what the truth is, because stating it will get you caricatured as a Taliban supporter. Because if you and listen, I hate the Taliban. Taliban is bad. But if you're a leftist, obviously you understand Taliban is bad. Do I need to waste my time virtue signaling that Taliban is bad? Who are the leftists saying Taliban is good? There's no one. What the fuck are you doing? But the thing is, they want you to waste your time saying Taliban bad, because once you say, yes, the Taliban is bad, then they go, well, then why do you want them to win? So why waste so Taliban bad, and then guess what? Taliban bad, and the United States doesn't give a shit about beating them. The United States of America doesn't give a shit about the Afghan people. And the United States of America being there increases their recruiting. Or I'm just expressing my sorrow at the Afghan people. That's what the media is trying to create, a narrative that Biden fucked up, when the truth is there was no way. This is the least bad option. You're looking at it. You're looking at the least bad option. There was no way for us to leave Afghanistan clean. It just couldn't happen. There was always going to be people hurt because we went in this way. Instead of accepting the Taliban surrender in 2001, instead of accepting the reality on the ground, instead of us not supporting the Mujahideen in the first place in order to draw blood against the Soviets, it was always going to be like this. That's the fact. That's the reality of what we caused. You want this stuff to start fixing itself? Stop intervening. Stop involving yourself. Stop inserting our military. Stop giving them recruitment by bombing and murdering people. And interact in constructive diplomacy. Win with soft power. Win with our cultural output. Win with our wealth. And make positive economic deals. And do it with people with honor and integrity. That's how you do it. But we don't want to do that. We want to steal for the rich companies like Carlyle Group. And by saying Taliban ban, you will feed well, first of all, the Taliban is bad. But it's stupid for a leftist to go, do you think Taliban is bad? That's a bad faith question. Once someone asks you, do you think Taliban bad? That's a bad faith question right off the bat. Because of course you do. They're trying to trap you into some dumb fuck narrative. Well, if Taliban is bad, then U.S. troops need to stay. Saudi Arabia bad. Yet I don't see you saying invade Saudi Arabia. Curious. Is it because the mainstream media is not saying invade Saudi Arabia? Is it because the CIA and the American defense industry profit from what's going on in Saudi Arabia? Weird.
Packed inside a U.S. military cargo plane. They were safely evacuated on Sunday to Qatar. The White House estimates that at least 11,000 Americans remain in Afghanistan. But those figures do not include the tens of thousands of Afghan allies who helped the U.S. during the war, and their families, who could be killed by the Taliban if they are not promptly flown out of the country. Let's begin our coverage today with CNN's Clarissa Ward, who's live in the...
So, by the way, chat, could be is doing a lot of work here. And nobody wants to say the Taliban is not going to kill people, because it's very likely the Taliban will kill people. But there, as far as I know, unless someone can correct me, there are no widespread reports of reprisals going on yet.
Afghan capital of Kabul. And Clarissa, you're getting a sense of just how quickly life is changing for ordinary Afghan citizens who are once again under the cruel rule of the Taliban.
That's right, Jake. I mean, there's the sense, I guess, that this is the new normalcy, and there are signs of normalcy creeping back onto the streets. The Taliban announced that government workers should be returning to their posts. Today, we saw traffic policemen on the roads
burned in my mind,
guiding traffic. As I've mentioned before, the Taliban really wants to show that it can effectively govern, that it is not just a fighting force. But walking around the streets, Jake, it was impossible to ignore that women were not as visible. And we went out looking for those women to hear their stories. Take a listen.
At the central Kabul market today, stores were open and people were back on the streets. Or at least some people. It was impossible not to notice that women here seemed to have largely melted away. One store was doing better business than usual. For more than a decade, Mohammed has been selling burqas, the head-to-toe covering once imposed by the Taliban. Business was good, but now it's even better, he tells us. More sales.
Why do you think you're selling more burqas right now?
Because the Taliban took over and all the women are afraid, he says. So that's why they're all coming in and buying burqas.
Do you feel abandoned?
Yeah, exactly.
In an apartment downtown, we saw...
So it's important, chat, to... Okay, so I'm going to pause this right now and give you some commentary. Straight up, this is the main capital city. And yes, the most of the gains for women in Afghanistan were in Kabul. But for the... As Mike covered on Hassan's stream, in the rural areas, the Taliban largely controlled. And this progress was not there. So for wealthier Afghans in the capital city, there was some progress. But the United States of America cannot hold this together forever. And the fact is, the Afghan National Army was losing on the battlefield. That's why Trump signed that peace agreement. We just didn't want to commit tens of thousands of troops again to fight the Taliban to a stalemate.
Saw that fear firsthand. Until last week, Fazila was working for the UN. That's not her real name, and she asked we not show her face. She's petrified.
By the way, I'm not going to cover the reality from you. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that there's not any downsides. Because this is the result of American intervention. This is the result of Americans supporting the Mujahideen. This is the result of America supporting the Pakistani intelligence services that created the Taliban. This is the result of American interference. You're seeing it. You're seeing it.
That the Taliban will link her to Western organizations, and says she hasn't gone outside since they arrived in Kabul.
You look very frightened.
Exactly. Too much stress. It is not easy for a person to work a lot with international organization, having more than 10 years experience of working with international, and now no one of them helped me. Just sending emails to different organizations that I work with you, but now no response.
Are you angry?
No, I'm not angry, but as a person who work with them, now I need their supports. It is not fair.
You look very emotional as well.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about my future, my daughters. What will happen to them if they kill me, 2 daughters without mother?
The The Taliban says they have learned from history and that women's rights will be protected. But many fearful Afghan women remain to be persuaded.
We're on our way now to the home of a prominent female Afghan politician. She's told me that there are Taliban fighters outside her front door, so she's asked that I go in alone.
Fawzia Kufi was one of the Afghan government negotiators during peace talks with the Taliban and has dealt with the group a lot. She says that promising change is not enough.
They have to really prove it in the provinces across Afghanistan. They have to show it by example. It's very easy to issue statements, but people need to see that in practice.
Kufi has every reason not to trust. Last year, she was shot by unknown gunmen. The Taliban denied they were behind the attack.
You have children?
I have 2 daughters.
And are they here?
They are in Kabul.
And are you concerned for them, or?
I'm concerned for my daughters and all the girls of Afghanistan. I don't want history to repeat itself on them very brutally.
Jake, we heard for the first time in person from the Taliban spokesperson, Zabiullah Mujahid. He gave a press conference tonight, and it was really interesting to see the types of questions that were asked by Afghan journalists particularly. It really goes to show you how much has changed here in 2 generations, or 2 decades, I should say. These journalists were not pulling any punches. They pushed him on women's rights. They pushed him on whether women would be able to continue working as journalists, continue working on television. And he was sort of struggling to answer and give a direct and coherent response. But the one question that really just stuck with me, it was so extraordinary. He was talking about this blanket amnesty that the Taliban has granted to everyone. And this journalist stood up and says, "But will the Afghan people forgive you for all the people, the innocent civilians who've been killed in your car bombs?" To which Mujahid replied, "Well, that's collateral damage. It happens." But the courage of that journalist to ask that question, to look him squarely in the eye and ask that, I think it speaks to the real changes that have happened here in the last 20
So, Chad, that's the kind of stuff you want to see. That's what the change you kind of want to see, is the domestic. And I think part of the problem with Afghanistan is we wanted to exercise control. So there wasn't an ability for the Afghans to develop their own politics internally, because we were always coming in there with huge bags of cash, buying people into power. That wouldn't have been there if that was legitimately the expression of the Afghani people.
20 years, Jake. And whether the Taliban has changed or not, the people here certainly have.
Right, the existence of social media, a whole generation of girls, women, and boys and men educated in the last 20 years. Clarissa, what was the mood like when you were walking around Kabul earlier today?
It's a very strange mood because it looks normal. It feels secure. There isn't that same, as a journalist even, there's not the same fear that at any moment.
Yeah, the literacy rate is around 30%. So after 20 years, that's pathetic. I mean, the U.S. didn't give a shit about Afghanistan. Like, come on, really? Come
on. You just mentioned that the Taliban claimed today that they've pledged amnesty to former Afghan forces. They also said there would be, quote, no violence against women.
It's Afghanistan as a whole.
Women, I mean, can anybody trust anything that they have to say?
I think that for the most part, people have a really hard time trusting. And I asked Fawzia Kufi, I said, come on, you've dealt with them, you've been with them, you've negotiated with them. Do you believe what they're saying? And she said, for now, it's hard for me to trust. She doesn't rule it out entirely. But here's the thing, Jake. It's not enough for the Taliban just to say women can be educated. It's about leading by example. And so if the Taliban wants to really show that they have changed in this respect from their fundamental ideology, then they need to actively campaign for women's education, to make it clear to all the people in this country that there is a new direction. Because the other woman, Fazila, as we called her, she told me that her sister went out to buy some milk the other day, and the grocer at the grocery store said to her, you know, you really should be wearing proper hijab, proper covering. He never would have said that 2 weeks ago. But now, because the Taliban is in town, people adopt their posture, they change their behavior to please what they think is the sort of prevailing lord or a ruler at the time. And that's the real problem here. The Taliban can't just say these things in passing. They have to actively show by example that there have been fundamental changes in the way they're going to govern. And I would say from people I have spoken to, not many have a huge amount of faith that that is really going to happen.
Yeah. Clarissa Ward, live in Kabul, Afghanistan. Thank you for your brave reporting, as always. Joining us now to discuss General David Petraeus, the former commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan from 2010
warmonger after warmonger. It's unbelievable.
To 2011. General, I'd like to know what your reaction has been to what we've seen out of Kabul the last few days.
Well, I think it's hard not to observe that it's just heartbreaking. It's tragic. And whatever you may think of the previous Afghan government,
you can call
its replacement by a group that has been fighting against us for 20 years, that has killed civilians left and right, that has done all of the things that you described in the rural areas that they have entered prior to getting to Kabul. It's very hard to see that as anything but disastrous. The previous government, again, for all of its shortcomings and flaws, wholeheartedly supported our effort to ensure that al-Qaeda could not reestablish the kind of sanctuary that it enjoyed when it planned the 9/11 attacks on Afghan soil under the control of the Taliban.
Okay, so right off the bat, this is horseshit because the Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. It is true that al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan, but the Taliban did not actively participate in 9/11. Now, when Bush said to the Taliban, turn over Osama bin Laden, they said, do you have any proof that he was behind it? He said, we're not giving you any fucking proof. Turn him over or we're at war. And so they went at war. And that's the actual depiction of events. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy. The morning politics guy, Politics Frogs, in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out, and we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid, and you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord. Come hang out. And maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.